And I just think when you can weave all of the great parts about your being in one, it's one simplifies a lot of things, but it also takes off that fancy layer. And I think so much of us go through life, especially in the work side, posturing on who we are, having to have a little bit more bravado. I'm like, what you see is what you get. Like, people who know me know me.
Hello. Today I chat with Elizabeth Weil, who has been part of a lot of growth stories. She was early Twitter and then helped grow it to 3,000 people, was early Andreessen Horowitz and then helped grow that, and then also was early to this thing called 137 Ventures, which is like a secondary market kind of growth stage thing, and helped grow that as well, and now has her own VC firm. And it was just really interesting to hear Elizabeth's perspective on what it takes to kind of grow something large. And so if you're a person in the world who is, there's this r/anti-work energy, and Elizabeth is kind of anti that. She's a runner. She loves jamming on things. And so we learn a lot about the Twitter story. First the Twitter story and how kind of that grew. How they start to work with other apps in the market, and how she kind of went from corp devs to biz devs to all these different things, how all this like letterpressing, all the kind of the human element to these early companies, which is really, really crucial. And then at A16Z, kind of learning about how she how the startup orgs work in terms of connecting people. And so she sees herself as a connector, and it was really connecting the Fortune 500, the Global 2000 to these startups, and like looking for those interesting win-win relationships. And then finally at 137, again, it was like, these growth stage companies where the executive team has all their money in equity, and so they don't have as much cash. And so, they gave out these loans to these, 137 gives out loans to the executives, collateralized by the equity. And so it was another kind of interesting piece around like kind of a later piece of the VC cycle. So yeah, I think it's a cool episode to learn about and to kind of just see someone who really just loves being on the ground and growing things from the bottom up. Yeah, check it out if you're interested in that. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and see you next time. Bye. Hello, Rhys's Pieces. I'm Rhys, the co-founder of Root, and welcome to The Rhys Show. I believe the best way to predict the future is to build it, and so I'm interviewing pioneers on the frontier to understand what the world will look like and the secrets behind how they're building it. These are insights from the frontier. And today, I'm excited to chat with Elizabeth Weil. So Elizabeth has been part of these amazing teams where she's grown and scaled things, at Twitter, going from 50 to 3,000, being part of early A16Z, and then also early 137 Ventures, which is like a growth firm. And so, Elizabeth, could you kind of tell us, maybe starting with each of those, starting with Twitter, actually, could you start with like how you grew and scaled these technology orgs?
Sure, and it's always a dabbled journey, but it does make sense looking backwards. But I would have to even start a few years before Scribble, where I'm just like around what I grew up around. I grew up in a little town near Sacramento in Orangevale, California, and my mom was a second grade teacher down the street from my house, and she always knew the people that made our community work. Like, she knew the gas station attendant, and she knew our deli sandwich maker, and the garbage man, and the mailman. And it's something that I've very much brought to my life, but I like making a big world feel small. And I show my children that now too. We know our garbage man by first name. And I think I always saw this feeling of like, bring great people together and just pull your community together. Uh, I ended up going to Stanford for undergrad, got my master's in engineering and my undergrad degree in economics. And really, what opened my eyes to all of tech in the Valley was this program within the engineering school called the Mayfield Fellows Program. And it takes about 10 or 12 students a year, a 9-month program. You basically are getting this business education as you also work at a venture backed company. You're paired with great mentors and CEOs to help you through and help you learn. And I was at a venture backed startup right before the end of school, and I stayed for about 2 years. And it just opened my eyes that you could be young, relatively limited experience, and still have dramatic impact at these fast growing companies. And I had so much fun at the same time. So after graduation, took a role at Menlo Ventures, a stage agnostic firm on Sand Hill, and learned the ropes of venture capital there in the tech industry. Then I went to Institutional Venture Partners, IVP, and that was more on the growth side. And we actually were fortunate to make a small investment in Twitter at the end of 2008. And Twitter was roughly 25 people at the time. I'd been a beta user, but I now was getting to see it from the business side. And I was just captivated. And it was, so much fun going on. And I had a friend go there, and she said that they needed somebody to start their analytics team. And actually, Kevin, my husband, also part of the Scribble story, he was in the PhD at Stanford in theoretical particle physics, so super nerd. And I said, hey, this little company, Twitter, needs somebody to start their analytics team. So he ended up actually going to Twitter when it was about 35 people and building out that team, ultimately running product at Twitter, and it stayed for 7 years there. But where I connect back in, I just realized how much fun he was having. I would go to the office without having a job there. I would work from there. There were no badges on doors. You would be there for the company all hands. And there were all these problems to solve that, of course, like no one else was doing it. So who cares if you don't have a role there? You just dive in and start helping. And Dick Costello, our CEO, joined. And I remember, a big pivotal force for me to go to Twitter while I was just hanging out doing my work and some Twitter work on the side, not paid. Ron Conway was always in those halls with us. And I remember him sitting me down. He's like, why don't you just work here? And I thought I had this fancy venture capital job as, a 20 something. And yeah, why couldn't I go work there? We didn't have children yet. We could work 24/7. It was such a magical time. So I went over to Twitter when it was roughly 50 people, stayed through a stage of hypergrowth to up about 3,000. And it was just fun. I started the corp dev team. That also became biz dev, biz ops, product marketing, anything under the sun that was kind of non-eng. I made the soccer team t-shirts and chased people around the office to sign welcome cards, and it was just, I letterpress stationery for each welcome of employees. It was just a fun time to be there. So
Yeah.
I think to answer your question on like what draws me, now looking back across all the things I've done, I've always had, call my big three, but kind of the orienting factors of how do I want to spend my time. And one, like choose a job for the people. Like who are you? You become the average of the people you surround yourself with, and go work with great people. Two for me was always location, and it's a little bit more of a moot point now with future of Zoom and remote work. But I say life's too short to have a really long commute or be in an environment you don't like. And I have far too many hobbies and things I like to do. Like I run every morning and I have 3 children and I like being part of my community. And there's so many pieces. I do, expert Lego sets. Like how would I have time? If you have a big commute or a big place, you just can't cram as much in every day. And then number 3 for me was, am I learning? And if you're with the right people in a location and environment you like, and you're learning every day, like that's the holy grail. And when something is out of whack on those, that's when I've made job changes. And when that learning curve flattens, and the cool thing about startups and venture capital, in my opinion, is the learning curve never flattens. Like you might start mastering one thing, but there's a heck of a lot of other things to keep on learning.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. I love those three. Yeah, just like a good, it's like good people and a good location. And as you say, you're kind of learning a lot where you just kind of like, then you kind of switch from place to place as you're like, okay, I feel like the learning juices here are kind of, I've extracted all of them.
And I think for me, it started even earlier. It started with my first job. My first job, I started a little woodworking business. So that was, more on creative, but in selling some entrepreneur hat. But the day I got my work permit, I went to down the street from my house. There was a Noah's Bagels. And this is back when bagels were cool and carbs were still in fashion. And I knocked on that door and I wanted to work at Noah's Bagels. And I ultimately stayed for 5 years, all through high school and my first year of college. And I started out as, a bagel slicer, but then I ended up being the shift manager and then running the catering program and then managing the inventory. And I mean, I even threw on a bagel suit from time to time when, someone needed to do it. And I just always like I knew everything about Noah's bagels. I didn't need to, but I knew about poppy seeds and how many seeds are in per pound, and the things you master because it's just interesting, and why not? And I think the thread from Twitter, obviously, things to learn and grow there. And then why Andreessen Horowitz was so interesting.
Or and
They were
actually, let me pause you for a second before going to A16Z, which is I'm curious more about the Twitter story, which is so you're there, it's 50 people, you've been hanging out with them for a bit. What does it? I think for someone like me, and also for just kind of like our listeners in general, it's like, I think we hear about these hyper growth startups and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And it had 50 people and then some amount of time had 3,000 people. But it's kind of like talking about, the universe. It's like, oh, it's 100 million light years long. Or it's like, okay, what does that actually mean? So like, could you tell us a little bit more about like the day to day in those first kind of couple years of like, what needs to be done? You're putting out fires. What does that mean? Like tell us a little bit more about the texture there.
It was so fun. It was so fun. So I mean, this could be 2 hours just on the fun of the early days of Twitter. But, there's this energy, first of all. If anybody's walked into a startup where you just have that energy, where it's fast growing, there's great people, and it's like there's too many things to do, and it's awesome. It's amazing. Every conference room in Twitter, and we had a few buildings, and we started obviously in a different building than they're in now. But all the conference rooms, one big theme, they were named after birds. Surprise, surprise. So I still remember like how many meetings in plover, for example, or blackbird. And you would just be solving, like 1/2 hour would be one problem you're solving about how to slice and dice the Twitter API and and there were all these people out in the wild, wild west of Twitter. Then the next meeting would be like the corp dev stuff, for example. Most people listening to this probably don't know that there was never like a Twitter Blue app. Like there was never a Twitter app that was owned by Twitter. It was the Wild West of these Twitterific and Twitterati and Tweety. And what my first project when I started was carving out, like going and looking at that landscape. Who's interesting? Which ones are there? Who's like, and we knew as in a business it was important to own a Twitter app. And I'd gotten to know Lauren Brichter, who was the founder of Tweety, and solo, amazing engineer, lived in the middle of the country, and he's had this incredible app. And he was perfectly happy having downloads and payment for this great app. But we ended up being able to do a great partnership and acquire his company and all that he'd built. And it was just such for me, and it's really been why it was so pivotal. And he probably doesn't even know how pivotal he was in my life. It was the piece of like, it wasn't just business that mattered. It wasn't the highest price. Like we had no acquisition budget when I started at Twitter. It was like really like, how can you get this on some Twitter t-shirts and some bird stickers? And I remember making this, I went to the craft store and I got this giant nest. And I had found out all of the things that he liked, like candies and sizes of t-shirt and his wife's, t-shirt size. And I had no budget, but I filled this nest with, Snickers and t-shirts and stickers, and I mailed it to him. And I just had this, like, for me, it brings back to like not having your community in your big world feel small. Like this wasn't about just tearing off his company and acquiring it by this big corporate. It was like we were this unique, scrappy, fun team at Twitter that knew his work was important. And it took a little bit of business sell and it took a little bit of human sell. And I love that piece of, just doing very craft bespoke work. It's like something that's very foundational to what I've now had the chance to build with our team at Scribble, where it's just, there's so like everything that along the startup journey is craft and is bespoke, in my opinion. You can't productize essentially this motion. Like you need to know what you need to know at the right point in time with the right people. And that's the magic part. So on one of the Twitter stories, like there was just a different problem to solve. And then the next half hour was a totally different problem to solve. But one of my favorite things about that scaling time, I run a small letterpress business called Paper Wheel that I started over 15 years ago now. I'm a big like right brain, left brain crazy person, but I letterpress on a 1923 Chandler and Price press still. It's my night and weekend, and later this evening I have things to ship and print. But I loved the iconic Twitter bird from before I was even an employee. And I had letterpressed flat stationery cards that had the Twitter bird on them. And in the early days, like you had nothing, you were not welcoming employees. And I was like, and our culture was so cool though. So I would handwrite with a Sharpie on these letterpressed cards, welcome Rhys, welcome John, welcome anyone. And in the early days, I would chase Ev and Biz around the office to sign the welcome cards. And over time, like, that's totally scalable when you're hiring like one person every few weeks. And then it became, we were hiring a lot of people per week. And then it became, let's only have people start on Mondays. And I remember my biggest stack over those 4 years of Twitter letterpress cards, which I continued to do until I left. I had a stack of 40 names on the Sunday night, before Monday's new employees started, and I still hand wrote those 40, welcome so-and-so. And no longer could Evan Biz, be chased around to sign them all. But the employees, the friends, at Twitter, like so many people had this card displayed on their desk until they left. And it warmed my heart along the way. So my absolute favorite job that I had at Twitter was the one welcome half hour of employee onboarding and telling the Twitter history and the story. And it just, having the privilege to work at a company that's solving like a world's mission at that point, being such an amazing communication channel, government, like everything like thinking back in 2009, Twitter was putting so many new things on the map, and it was quite a journey. So I could go on and on, but
no, I love that. That's it's cool to hear about too, the kind of like, there's like the productization. I mean, because you can imagine a different version of things where you just like get the chat GPT bot to say like, hello, welcome new employee. We are grateful for you to be here, or whatever. And it just doesn't have the same ring. And so it makes me also think about like some of the best company cultures, and Patrick Collison from Stripe will talk about this, and when he's learning from Google, where it's like, why did Google have such a great company culture? Well, because their business model is super good. Why did Stripe have a good company culture? Because their business model is so good. And so Twitter is like, it's easy to have a better, cool culture when there's like, when you can feel the growth and you can feel the momentum, when you guys are doing something that's cool and that's growing. And then it kind of makes this great loop of like, you're not trying to bring people onto some sinking ship. It's like, no, we're building something awesome. Like, come join the squad.
I think and that's something I talk to a lot of our Scribble founders and CEOs, both about the culture. I love the culture piece. Like half of my bookshelf is corporate culture, and I think having this larger mission than yourself. And I think when you see that, especially on a world stage where it's a very fast growing company, where something like Twitter is really on the world stage, and you're helping democracy and you're helping save somebody's life, because these different things, we would celebrate those at our company all hands. And I talk to our founders now, you can celebrate moments in your company even if it's not the highest flying fastest growth company, but doing that and seeing that the work you do each day, even in the weeds, is translating to something larger than yourself. I mean, even for something like Scribble, it's our founders that are doing the work, but being able to see that we're helping in some tiny sliver of doing a larger, painting into a larger picture. And I think that's really important. And then I think what makes some other really great corporate cultures is just, something I talk about at Twitter, like act like an owner and be an owner. And there's something about having, well spelled out values and mission and things like that. But in the early days of Scribble, like, again, we had no budget. I was helping out of fun. I like wine and I like Napa area, and none of those small businesses knew how to use Twitter. And so I helped onboard wineries to Twitter, like really fun. You strike great relationships. And then I saw our team and like we're having so much fun at the office and people you like being around. I'm like, why don't we bring in a winery and do wine tasting Tuesdays at Twitter, and like employees get something, the winery would love to do it, and it was make those things happen. We had Tweet Feet, and Tweet Feet was on Tuesdays, and it was our running club. And some of these things that can take absolutely zero budget, but that you help build along the way and make that connective tissue of your company that much stronger.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like and just like whatever agency you have in the world to just kind of like, oh, I love this thing, I love wineries, yeah, let's hit them up, And so it's kind of like an easy thing, and then being the catalytic energy that helps other. It makes me also think about. I get two things. One is, Sam Altman from OpenAI was talking about how just as the world is spinning around them and it's kind of intense, he's just like, look, we're just focused on the mission. We're excited to do the mission. We want to do really good things. So it's like, that's just such a core piece of any, whether it's a company or whether it's a nation or whatever it may be, it's like the mission focus. And then the other thing it makes me think of is kind of the Bree Wolfson from Stripe had this great piece on what I miss about working at Stripe, which talks about those early days of an org where it's like super intense. If people are working hard, but you're working for something greater than yourself. And I guess I'm curious, Elizabeth, because I feel like there's like, I don't know, there's this weird 2023 moment thing of like, there's like, I don't know if there's like r/anti-work energy, but then it's like, are you allowed to work hard? How have you seen that play out either in yourself or in some of your companies?
Oh gosh, yes. And I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, I see it in my husband every day too.
Nice.
Kevin, and he's a whole other fun journey along the way, and he very much maps into my life. Uh, we met in grad school and were married, right after that. So all of our professional journeys have been along together. But he's the president of Planet now, and that mission and the larger picture of he loves it. And I asked him even over the weekend, are you happy? Like he's working like 20 hours a day. And are you happy? He's like, yes, I'm happy. I love it. And he's solving problems. You're seeing how you're helping the world change, and you're doing it with a great team. And it's something that I feel even with my work at Scribble, where we have the chance to work with so many great, I look at, like little stakeholder groups, like all of your founders are doing something interesting and you're able to connect with them, and like our limited partners are phenomenal and I learned things from them. Our mini team Scribble is awesome, and I learn things from all of my team, and we like make everything better together. And it's just such a fun it's a fun motion. I really do look at it like that.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's like the way I see it too, and I sometimes talk about it with my other kind of less techie friends about it, it's like, look, there's some people that really love to work, and if they're doing great work with a thing that they like to do, that's awesome. Let them do it. And then if you're less into that and you want to hang out more, that's fine. Like, and they're both kind of fine. And like, it's not like the super hard worky people should be like, judging the others. It's not like the people who are like chilling more should be like looking at the tech people and be like, you work too hard. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It's fine it takes all types.
Yes.
So
And for me, the it's the overlapping. I mean, it makes it exhausting, but one of the things that I really like about the venture motion, in particular, and just the way I lead my life, to be honest, uh, you don't mind the two merging. So this weekend, for example, like another board member, I would say he's a friend, but we went on a walk. But you could be like, oh, that's a board member, or the founders that we start as a team Scribble, we start a WhatsApp thread one-to-one with the founding team and then team Scribble, and they our founders say they have Scribble in their pocket. And again, to the bespoke motion of venture capital, it's like they have a certain question about something at that point in time. It's again not productizable, so can you help close this candidate, or hey, do you know so and so, or we've been thinking about this partner, do you happen to have an intro to this and those I mean, it's so much of life that yes, they come over and meet me in my driveway to go on a walk, and they happen to meet my children. And I just think when you can weave all of the great parts about your being in one, one simplifies a lot of things, but it also takes off that fancy layer. And I think so much of us go through life, especially in the work side, posturing on who we are, having to have a little bit more bravado. I'm like, what you see is what you get. Like people who know me. And I can of course go fancy, but yes, I would love to take you on a walk and chat about all the things and all the pieces that are you in addition to your company.
Yeah, it's like yeah, the combination of work and life can be beautiful in many ways. So let's talk about Twitter. It's intense, but it's really fun. You're part of the squad. You're building out all these different functions. And then how? Tell me about like so then you joined A16Z Andreessen Horowitz right around the time of their first or their third fund. What? Tell me about like what that was like and how again yeah what was it like to
Yeah.
start to grow that thing? Yeah.
Another really fun step. And again, I think like I love the idea of learning. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go straight back to venture capital yet. And this was like a hybrid. So for those of you who know Andreessen Horowitz, very big operations motion at the firm. And really, we were putting operations on the map. If you remember back in, this was what, 2012 ish, no venture firms really had an operations motion, especially one that they talked about. And we were doing it in a very methodical way at Andreessen Horowitz, which I very much admire now looking, that I didn't know I was seeing that piece of growth. But I joined as roughly, I think there were about 50 people there. And my role was on the market development team. And for the different verticals, market development was essentially the motion connecting the Fortune 500, Global 2000 to our portfolio companies, end goal being revenue, ultimately business development relationships. And we were doing this across enterprise and consumer. We built out a briefing center. We did over time. It was the market dev team was 3 people when I joined. We built it out over 4 years to about 35 people. So a really, really impactful motion with our companies because especially in some of those portfolio companies of ours that had a big list of corporate buyers, by getting those two parties in a room together, like really could print some real revenue for these companies. It was such a fun motion. I would go to something and I'd meet the CMO of Chipotle or, the CEO of Qualcomm or, a Walmart executive and like Indra Nui from Pepsi, like people along the way. And these big companies needed to know about technology, and our companies would love to have access to people like this. So the days were really fun. They were so busy, but they were fun because a typical executive briefing day, say the exec team of Molson Coors would come in. And you're like, I didn't know today I was going to get a boot camp on beer. And it was so fun. So you talk a little bit about tech and the industry that we all saw. They would tell you a fascinating overview of their business. And then you would be bringing the companies in to meet. So if, I don't know, say Frito-Lay they had learned about Slack or a mobile analytics tool, or Pinterest was just being put on the map and introducing them to Kraft or MasterCard and Lyft. And it was just fun. So building out both the team, making that happen, and then also learning in this hypergrowth way of like industries I never thought I was going to get a boot camp in was just awesome. What it did tease out for me was that I missed the investing side. And I think it was awesome to crave that again. And that was the step where I ended up taking a role as a GP at 137 Ventures in the structured secondary space. And a really cool part of the asset class. But again, it was time to go back on the investing side, but still doing a little bit of that motion because I just love plugging people together. But
Yeah.
so fun. So yes,
I like it. It's like a cool. It's like as you said, it's like the big world small. Make the big world small. It's like you were doing that, which is like, hey, here's this whole set. You can imagine all the Fortune 500, 2000 on the left side, and then all these startups on the right side, and you're just trying to like matchmake. You're just like, you guys might go on a good date.
Yes, remember being on the, and I started using it. It's like, what do I want to learn about? And I'm a big ultra runner, and so met with the CEO of Brooks Running, and the Brooks exec team came in, and they rattle off like all the things that are interesting to them, and you just see these sparks fly in your brain where you're like, oh, we have cool thing about Andreessen Horowitz, they had a very broad portfolio too. So it's like you're going shopping in your head of like which companies could they there's interesting things that can happen both on the enterprise and consumer side. So yeah, it was a really fun job.
That's cool. And then let me ask a question before going to 137, which is, what was it like, to be part of, Twitter as it was growing versus to be part of something like A16Z as it was growing? Like, what's the what's the difference between like a venture firm growing versus a company? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, for better or for worse, Andreessen Horowitz was feeling like it was growing at a similar hypergrowth speed because it's now such a large powerhouse. And we were. I mean, there were so many people that worked there. That was a fun energy too. But the piece that was different is I had a more focused mission at A16Z, just
Mhm.
about, it was still a huge expansive universe of the possibilities that could be connected, for example. But, there was a more focused thing on what are you building. Um, and at Twitter, it was still the Wild West, which was quite fun. There was so much, that lay ahead. But on the uh, Andreessen side, like it just was, you were really able to see that how knitting together operations in addition to venture capital could be powerful. And I think it taught me, and when I look back on my background, I think I got to steal the great things from each of the places along the way and then leave behind the stuff I didn't like. And that's so the foundation for Scribble. Like we can help with that motion with our portfolio founders. Like, who's your dream list? And now we do it at a smaller scale, but those people are accessible. And if you matchmake the right people, like that can happen and that can change the game for a small, fast growing company.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. It's like, and I think that it is crazy. Just and for the listeners who aren't aware of this, and if you want to dive deeper into this, check out something like The Secrets of Sand Hill Road. It's like before Andreessen, there wasn't really operations weren't really tied into VC firms. It was just kind of like there was some random people, and you had these folks who were giving out some money or whatever, but they said kind of good luck, And this is Andreessen's more like, no, we will have like, there will be Elizabeth will be there, and she'll be actively trying to connect you with all these people or whatever. And so that kind of spread into the more wider VC industry after that. So tell us about, let's talk about 137 and I know less about it. It's like a growth state. Tell us like what is it and what was your kind of role there? Yeah.
Yeah, it was founded by one of my classmates at Stanford, one of my Mayfield Fellow friends, Justin Fishner Wolfson, and we've gotten to know each other. And he's like an awesome, like his brain works in different ways. And he had this idea long ago, before others, were really spending any time thinking about the secondary space, let alone the structured secondary space. But these, fast growing companies, picture something of, Facebook when it was still private. You're working away as an engineer, you have significant equity, as it translates into, fast growing companies, but you're cash strapped. Like you've never been able to buy your first home or get out of your apartment, or you might be having kids, or on and on and on. And I joined at a time when, people are graduating through that life cycle. Like, are kids going to college? Are you getting, and there's reasons that you need capital, and you have so much of your personal wealth tied up in companies. So the motion of 137 Ventures was essentially providing loans, so secondary shares, and making that possible. So the executive teams, like, you're not making them run off to Tahiti, and with millions and millions and millions yet. Like there's still appetite to grow, but how do you release that pressure valve? Release just a little bit so you can buy your first home, or you can get out of your apartment, make it a little bit bigger if you're having your first baby. And it was really being there with capital at the right point in people's lives. And I think that's what really attracted me. It was the human piece of it. And on the business side, it's phenomenal. You're able to build a portfolio, like with your venture capital hat on, of these later stage, fast growing companies, and have a lot, significant upside going forward. And what I also was drawn to, was a small team. Then when I was there, it was roughly 10 people. And there's something very magical about working with small, scrappy, wear a lot of hats types of teams. And what that taught me, and very, again, foundational for my Scribble journey and what we've built here, we all wear a lot of hats. I say we're, good little MacGyvers that are, using duct tape but showing polish. And I like that feeling. And I think it keeps you hungry. It makes you still feel like and act like an owner. It makes you so much more empathetic to the journey that we're all going through on this crazy thing called life or founding companies. Uh, but I think there's something so great about that core, like wear enough hats, stay on, don't have too cushy of a job, like work hard, play hard, and it all, it fills that energy cycle.
Yeah, being close to the rail of like, yeah, just like doing the real kind of intense work. And so if I understand that correctly, it's in structured secondary, because I kind of imagine it as there is as these companies, they get bigger and there's they have this equity, but the equity's locked up. There hasn't been an M&A or an IPO yet. And so they're like, hey, could I get access to this? And so do you give them, is it like a secondary market where you're buying the equity from them and giving them cash, or it's more loans? How does it actually work?
And this could be a whole other, in the
Yeah.
tech secondary, this could be another hour podcast, because some people buy like a venture capital funds portfolios as a
Yeah.
secondary, or you've heard some tech companies do a tender offer, for example, where everyone can take some off of the table, and that's a much larger scale. The high level nuts and bolts of the 137 model was working with the executive teams at these companies that were on that growth trajectory, and these founders and executives really are the company. Like a lot of their net worth is tied up in these companies and larger shareholders. So being able to provide a loan and collateralizing that with some of the shares. And then if you think of it at the time, like still there's a whole timeline of it's, a later stage company, but growing to hopefully a public offering. At the time of that IPO, everyone shares in the upside. So there's great tax implications as well, but that these founders could hold on to a lot more capital and parts of their company than they would have to had they just done an outright, secondary, or just sold their shares, or not be able to have that pressure valve relief.
Got it. Yeah. And so this one specifically was, it's the kind of executive team and then giving loans collateralized by the equity. So that makes a lot of sense. And so kind of looping before spending the last little bit of the podcast on Scribble, I guess I want to ask, so I guess, there's something still here about, you're part of these different, you like being part of these ragtag, kind of, wear all hats teams. You like growing things. I guess, is there like, maybe are there like some, I'm not sure the right things to ask you, but maybe the first one is like, do you have like learnings about like how to grow things? Maybe that's because you've grown a lot of different things. How does one grow a thing?
Not productized, of course. Like my whole life has been learning, but I haven't really like boiled it down. You just kind of keep doing it. I think that's the cool part of, they say venture, and it's an overuser, but it's so pattern matching. And I kind of get that now, where you're just collecting all of these things over time. And that's what makes you an amazing VC, or that's what makes you an amazing leader. And I actually have never thought like sitting down and thematically writing all that I've learned. There's be no time for that. But it's, again, it's just like, if I'm working with great people, I'm doing it in a place I like, and I'm learning, like that's all of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think it's a reasonable answer, which is like, there's a ton of implicit knowledge there, which is just like, you've done the thing, and and a lot of it, it's just in funny ways too. It's just simple, which is like, look, you could say XYZ, but really it's just like showing up every day, for a long period of time. Stuff will happen,
Now that you phrase it that way, a lot is how you orient yourself to ask that question, and what's your outlook on life. Because if somebody asked me today, like, well, we have to go do this, or we're going to do Y, my brain says, okay, how are we going to go do that? And you can do it. You don't know yet, but that it's not like, no, we can't. That's not going to work for this company. It's like, okay, we're going to go tackle. And then you start lining up the things. So I think it's a framework and an outlook in a lot of ways. And maybe what really, you know, shakes out the great founders from the mediocre ones, and why for me Scribble investing motion is so founder driven. And I know it when I see it, I know it when I feel it, even when doing it on Zoom, when you're like getting to know someone, there's a different type of founder that I know I like working with. And it's just there. Sometimes you also have to wrap that with phenomenal products and goals for the company, but there is something about that framework and that outlook of like that person is going to make magic happen, and they're running through walls. Like you don't even have to tease that out. You're just like, that's an ethos.
Yes, totally. Yeah, it's like it's these people that are agentic, relentlessly resourceful, all these kind of energy running through walls. So it's like they can't help but do it, and they're always saying yes. They're always trying to find this, do the next thing, and yeah, you did it a bunch yourself, and so you can kind of see it in other people. You're like, oh, that person's hungry. That person's like looking to do the thing. So tell us a little bit about Scribble, and I guess I'm especially curious. Yeah, like what what either I guess what kinds of but actually, let's just start. Like, what made you want to start Scribble, and tell us about kind of the things you're investing in?
Oh, life is a journey. Uh, so much. So anyway, I finally picked my head up at the tail end of 137, and I said, like, I love that part of the asset class, and like the interesting weird thing we were doing there. But it felt a little more late stage for me. And it was late stage, and that's what also made it awesome. But Kevin and I had been fortunate to angel invest for, and it was totally on the side. We all had operating jobs. Kevin had gone on to Instagram, and then starting Facebook's Libra, within all the crypto initiatives there before going over to Planet. And so that was I had done all of these things, and we could make small angel investments. And this was, not huge checks, but it was great people you collect along the way, like somebody that comes over for lunch, or an engineer that you knew that was leaving X, Y, or Z, or a former colleague from Twitter. And we invested in about 100 companies, small checks over time. And I picked my head up, and I now had my kids, and I have 6-year-old twins and an 8-year-old now, but they were babies, and I started thinking, like, if we keep investing in this clip personally, like I'm never going to be able to send them to college. And I looked at our portfolio, and I think there's like 23 unicorns in that set now. So it was pretty good for just investing in the people that you like collect along the way, and like interesting folks in your network. And so when I left 137, I thought, like, what do I love doing? What am I best armed to do? I was also very scared. If you, I was in a mental spot then that I thought, like, what am I going to, nobody's going to want to hire me ever again. And I'm not working for a larger shingle. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? And it was just like, it was this feeling of somebody must have erased your LinkedIn, for example, and like wiped out all of the experience you'd had in your past. But it was really unanchoring for me. And what I found as I went through like the normal motions of life, that I naturally had more time now to pick up the phone for a founder, or I had a little bit of time to like be like, that idea is interesting, and like tease out a little more and make it a small investment. And having that, that ability to kind of grow what do you love doing organically, and then at the time, like doing it in a way that I knew I wanted to live my life, where I get to choose. And the name of, even Scribble, like it makes you think something a little differently. But anyway, so this year of angsty 2019, I call it. But then by the end of the year, I started a really great little motion. I was like, I'm going to give myself a test portfolio amount to run this model of essentially like writing a little bit bigger than an angel check, doing it in a deliberate way. I had, a small handful, because how do you, as a single GP, how do you like make ideas better? Had a small collective of other great angels that, you'd have like a Monday call, and you'd spar on some ideas, then you'd call, and And I felt like I had this mini, external independent team, for example, that made ideas better, and we swapped deals and things. So I was making, pretty steady set of investments. And then we all know 3 years ago this month, what happened? Like, I look at it as the day the leprechaun traps never came home from kindergarten, but COVID. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, freeze, we don't know what's happening in the world. And I like, there was, it, and I just, everyone was like, stop, halt. Like, the investing side, everyone was triaging their portfolios and not knowing what was doing. The sky was falling. And I just looked at that and I'm like, what an inflection point. And what a game change in venture ag right now. We don't know what it's going to do, but it is a change. And I just thought, what a time. It would be dumb to take the pedal off and not be making investments. So I had the crazy idea in April of COVID, when I woke up in the middle of the night with the name Scribble, and then for me everything, that I had a playbook from there, because it was like with a name that felt so me. It's like, I see this, and crazy idea during COVID with 3 infants at home to start a venture capital firm. And the world doesn't need another VC firm is going through my head. But I just saw such a change in time, and Scribble Ventures was born. And I knew I wanted it to be similarly modeled with the motion I'd been able to do as an angel of this collaborative size check. And what we call that now is roughly 750K to $1 million initially, in great founders, where you don't have to be sharp elbowed. Other great angels can get involved. You can bring those people in. You can call other great VC firms to be involved, and others can call you. Work with other great investors, and that was really what became the foundation. So the summer of Zoom, 2020 style of COVID, uh, Scribble Ventures Fund One was born, a $50 million fund focused on pre-seed, seed, opportunistic A. And really the biggest learning and shift for me, I hated even selling Girl Scout cookies as a little kid. So I never wanted to ask a soul for money. And it's still an uncomfortable motion for me, because I'd rather help you first before asking you for anything. And what I realized when Scribble was born is, as soon as you believe so deeply in what you're working on, it just happens. And the people that you've met and collected along the way are like, we want to support you. We want to help build this into something special. And we were fortunate to raise Scribble 2 in 2022 and announce that last fall. And again, very core, $55 million fund, a small follow-on breakout fund for some of our winners. And doing this in this motion that I don't want to build Scribble right now to be a $500 million seed fund. Like, there's something magical about sitting core, very hungry and lean, but working with phenomenal founders, writing this collaborative size check that allows us to play with everybody in the venture ecosystem and matchmake along the way. And it just really is what gives me great joy every day when I wake up and say, I get to choose. And now with 3 growing kids, like, I love my Scribble work, and I love having them say, like, mom is the boss and mommy gets to choose. And I can really work so much of life and Scribble all into one, and just be very much Elizabeth unapologetically.
That's great. That's
Finally,
it. It
finally.
makes That's great, because it makes me, my 2023 New Year's resolution was to be myself, and so it's great that you're able to also be yourself, because you're just like, look, this is who I am. I love helping founders. I love helping collab with these people. I also love my kids, and so you get to do both in this beautiful, kind of more flexible way.
But
So with that,
life's too short to have different stories and multiple personalities. Like, there'd be
yeah,
no
be oneself. Be oneself. Exactly. Yeah,
you
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Elizabeth. And for folks that want to check her out, there's on Twitter, being part of the original Twitter stuff, she has Elizabeth at Elizabeth on Twitter, so
I have to tell you, I'm going to interrupt. I have to tell you, I have at Elizabeth on Twitter, not because I work there. When I was early in my VC career, still at Menlo Ventures, Ev and Biz were working on some company called Odeo in the podcasting space of all things. And I had cold called them. And I remember Biz said, hey, you should check out this little thing we're spinning on Twitter. And I got in, signed up for some reason with Elizabeth. I have no idea why I just played Elizabeth, but I did. And then I was dormant for like a year. And when we started diligencing, when I was at 130 at IVP about doing the investment in Twitter, they said, has anyone used this? And I was like, I think they have. And I went in and it said, somebody's taken the password for my usual. And I put in my usual password and sure enough, I'm at Elizabeth. So I tweeted once, was dormant, and then at Elizabeth was born. So I earned it.
You earned it. Yeah, exactly. Before you started working at Twitter. That's good. That's good. That's good.
Was, at Elizabeth on Instagram. Like Kevin Systrom was a classmate at Stanford, and he'd been working on this thing called Bourbon. Ultimately, it turned into Instagram. So I was
getting those early Twitter, early usernames is fun. And then if you're a founder, definitely go to scribble.vc. That's SCRIBBLE.vc. And feel free to hit up Elizabeth or the team there if you're building something. If you're ready to run through walls and want Elizabeth to run through walls with you, hit her up. And with that, anything else to say to our listeners today, Elizabeth?
Happy National Scribble Day.
Happy National Scribble Day. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and goodbye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star podcast review or subscribe on YouTube. And if you'd like to chat about this episode with a community of amazing, smart, ambitious, divergent people, come on by and join our Discord. You can find it at root.co. That's ROOTE.co. And then finally, if you'd like to contribute to these ideas being shared more widely in society, you can support the podcast production team at patreon.com/Rhys Lindmark. That's patreon.com/RHYSLINDMARK. Thanks, and see you here for the next episode. Bye.